Hi, I'm John Pope. I'm moderator of this proud panel about the Pulitzer Prizes and the impact they may have. The panelists are, going from left to right, Beth Henley, who won the prize for her wonderful comedy, Crimes of the Heart. Lisa Damour, who was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for her play, Detroit. And Thomas, whom you've met, who has edited Tennessee Williams' plays for the New Direction series. We're here to talk about the prize and the impact it can have on a career. I will start this on a personal note because I was a member of the Times-Picayune's team that won 2 Pulitzers for public service and breaking news for coverage of Hurricane Katrina and its aftermath. I got to tell you, when we got the news on an afternoon in April 2006 that we had scaled the Everest of American journalism, we went nuts. We were screaming, we were jumping up and down, and we were crying our eyes out all at the same time. Because the story, as anyone who has lived here in the past 10 years knows, it was the most traumatic thing any of us will ever cover. And so many of the people in the room, my colleagues, had been clobbered. We realized that people thought we were doing a good job, and that was great. It was a reward, it was release. But even then, we realized the Pulitzer was not El Dorado, because one of my colleagues, who had lost her house in Lakeview, turned to my wife and said, "Does this mean I get my house back?" Oh, yeah. And I must say that having Pulitzers on my resume has not made people call me back quicker or even want to talk to me for stories. And yet, and I could not look at these Tiffany mementos that we got for 4 months without bursting into tears because of the sheer ferocity of the impact of that story. However, now I can look back and think, yeah, someone at a national level realized we were doing good. And it always makes me smile. Beth won all on her own for a play. What was it like? What was it like when you learned that you had won?
I don't know if it was just more celebratory. Nobody was crying. We were just shocked. And, we went out to a restaurant and ordered champagne, and then we went by and picked up a friend of mine, Jim McClure, who was staying at a hotel there, and people started coming over to our house. I was living with my boyfriend, Steve, and ordered pizza and wine and talked on the phone. I had one of those 70s, like, French phones. I had a picture of myself talking to my parents. My mom was in shock that I even had a job. They were just totally dumbfounded, as was I. So luckily, I was young and completely surprised, and I didn't handle it great all the time, but I wouldn't trade it for a barrel of monkeys.
Did you feel it created a burden of expectation for anything you did?
I would rather have a burden of expectation than not get your play done, which,
Good response. So, Lisa, we were talking yesterday afternoon about the way you felt when you learned you had been a finalist for Detroit.
Well, it's interesting. Maybe I'll tell a little bit about where I was when I found out, because it kind of speaks to what we were talking about. So I'm a playwright, but I also do a lot of interdisciplinary collaborations with dancers and visual artists, work that's more experimental that sometimes doesn't happen in theaters. And I've been the play of my, so this is a quick example. Last year I had a play called Airline Highway, which is based on a motel on Airline Highway here in New Orleans, and that play was on Broadway. And 2 months later, I had a show premiere in a 500-acre meadow at Longwood Botanical Gardens, with the audience watching from about 200 feet away from the action wearing headphones. So I work in two very different worlds. And Detroit was really, in some ways, one of the first plays that, the easiest way for me to explain it is one of my first plays to get produced in a regular big theater. And it was kind of a whole new world for me. And so after Detroit was produced as Steppenwolf, I was developing a piece called How to Build a Forest, which is also a New Orleans-inspired piece. I grew up here in New Orleans. And I was doing a residency with students at, Amherst. Mm-hmm. And so it was very busy. We were working with like 60 students, me and my collaborator, Katie, and we came out of a workshop, and there was a phone call from a producer that was interested in Detroit, and he said, "Lisa, congratulations, I'm so proud of you, click." And I was like, okay, and then I listened. There was another voicemail. It was my agent, and she said, "Well, Lisa, such good news. Call me back as soon as you can." And I looked at Katie, and I said, "I think I won something." And she was like, "What? What do you think you won?" And then I remember. Then I called my agent, and she was like, "Yeah, you were a finalist for the Pulitzer." And I was like, "Really?" And she was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh my God!" And Katie's like, "Lisa, we got to get into our next class. Come on!" And so then I had to run and get into my next class.
How transitory glory is.
Exactly. Yeah. But it also, for me, it was kind of great because I grew up as more of an experimental theater artist. Winning the Pulitzer was not something it was on my radar, but not as something that would happen to me, because usually people that do 8-hour durational performance experiments aren't the playwright that win the Pulitzer Prize. So it was a whole new world for me in some ways. I kind of knew that the artistic director of Steppenwolf had nominated me, but I had also forgotten because I was doing all this other work. Mm-hmm. So and also I'll make myself really vulnerable here. Growing up as an experimental artist, I was a little bit like, oh, the Pulitzers, that's so conservative. That's for conservative playwrights. And then when I found out I had won, and I looked that Bruce Norris had won the award that year, a writer that I think is, pardon my French, kick-ass. And then John Guare was the other finalist. I was like, wow, that is really good company, Lisa. Like, you need to grow up and realize that, like, this is an honor, and it's going to be a really interesting moment and opening in your career. So,
do people treat you differently?
Do they treat me differently? No, I don't think so. I think, I won't know for sure, but I think it's helping theaters take risks on producing my plays. I think that because the Pulitzer, there's this problem in America where, like, it's still really, like if you're an artist, it's so hard to prove that you're legitimate. Do you know? Like, I think that there's still, especially for playwrights, there's this feeling that we're these kind of jobless vagabonds running around stirring up trouble, And even in universities or theaters that are trying to produce you, like, I think somehow people were like, oh, now we can take a risk on Lisa D'Amour. Because she was a finalist for the Pulitzer.
No, I'm curious because I think we all follow awards, mm-hmm. and mm-hmm. it's always interesting to see, and it makes me want to go see the plays
yes.
that won and were finalists.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, Angels in America. I mean, mm-hmm. who'd have thunk
mm-hmm.
that it won the Pulitzer?
Mm-hmm.
Thomas has an interesting perspective from his works, studying and editing the works of Tennessee Williams. And what effect do you think the Pulitzers had on his career, sir?
What effect they had on his career? Well, I think they've always been important. I think from the beginning, and it's in his case, it's not what put him on the map, however, mm-hmm. And that's something that we talked about yesterday. People winning early in their career or late in their career, the difference between that. What really put Williams on the map was The Glass Menagerie in 1945. And when the idea of this panel came up, and the Pulitzer Foundation was going to support it, and so on and so forth, one of the questions was, well, can you talk about Tennessee Williams and the Pulitzer Prize? Well, he won twice. Okay, so I thought that was about it. And I did some digging, and I don't know how many people know the story of Menagerie's gestation and eventual arrival on Broadway. It was a tough one. But the play was picked up by a guy named Eddie Dowling, who had been a very successful producer of vehicles for himself that he toured for years. But what put him on the radar for Audrey Wood was that he'd starred in William Saroyan's The Time of Your Life. And he found an unknown producer named Louis Singer, and he said, if you will invest in this play, I will make you money, but you cannot look at the script until after opening night. And Louis Singer said yes. And he was advised throughout the process by a very good friend of his who was the critic George Jean Nathan. And I don't know if any of you know this, but the award that is given out to drama critics is called the George Jean Nathan Award. So he was buddies with Eddie Dowling, and his girlfriend who played Laura, her name was Laura Hayden? Julie Hayden. Julie Hayden played Laura in the production. And the most recent time before Dowling getting that script that George Jean Nathan had written about Williams was an overview of the 1940 season, and he mentioned the out-of-town disaster of Battle of Angels and called it a cheap sex shocker. So he was not a big fan of Tennessee Williams, and one of the things that he did, and it's documented, was run around and tell people that Williams hadn't really written the play, that most of it was improvisation from Eddie Dowling, which, needless to say, Williams was not happy about. Also, when they were trying out in Boston at one point, Williams had to go out of town. He left, and he came back, and there was a new scene in the play. It was a drunk scene. They said, well, every good play's got to have a drunk scene, especially if we want to tour this. And George Jean Nathan and Eddie Dowling had written the drunk scene, and Williams was furious, and he said, well, fine, you want a drunk scene? I'll write the drunk scene. And that was the only time he wrote to order, and it was that scene where Tom comes home drunk and tells Laura about the magician. It's actually a wonderful scene. Anyway, there was apparently a lot of buzz about Williams getting the Pulitzer for The Glass Menagerie. The Pulitzer that year was given to Mary Chase for Harvey. It's a good play, but apparently, and I found a couple sources, I didn't find any concrete, like in a letter explaining, nobody's confessing, but apparently George Jean Nathan campaigned to the people on the committee not to give it to Tennessee Williams. So he lost out there, fine. And then it was apparently unanimous. He won it for Streetcar in 48. And then what I would love to know, we were talking about this yesterday also, that we now, since a while back, I have a whole list here, since 83, we know who was shortlisted. They let that information out. Now, it can be found elsewhere, and I did find one article, well, two articles. One, it's written about in John Lahr's bio, and then in another place about Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. But I contacted the Pulitzer office up at Columbia, and they were not forthcoming. They wouldn't tell me who the other finalists were. So we don't know. Was he a finalist for The Rose Tattoo? Was he a finalist for Iguana? We have no idea. However, it turns out that he was one of 5 shortlisted in 1955 for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. I don't know if if it worked that way the way it works now, but now usually the committee that hands their suggestions to the Pulitzer Foundation of Columbia are comprised of 1 critic, 1 playwright, and 1 scholar selected by the Pulitzers to go see plays and make their suggestions. Well, they made 5 suggestions that year, and their first choice was Clifford Odets' The Flowering Peach. which I'm sure you see revived all the time at regional theaters. Their second choice was The Bad Seed. And I couldn't find out who the next two were, but they did not want to give it to Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And Joseph Pulitzer Jr. was still alive and stepped in and said, you have to give it to Tennessee Williams. So who knows what goes on behind these, the business of prizes. And I think it must be a tough thing because it's not capricious. I think the people who go out and, our Susan Larson, I don't know if she's here, she was on the Pulitzer Prize committee for fiction a few years ago, and they work really, really hard. And I know that people do it for the theater. They go around the country, they see plays all over the place, and they think about it good and long. And so for the Pulitzer Foundation to decide, we're not going to have a winner this year, or to take it out of their hands, which they've done at times, is kind of tricky.
I can add to that, because Susan was my wife's best friend, and when she heard about that, my wife, who had been PR director at Tulane, said, you've got to issue a statement saying this was not our doing. We picked winners. The board is a funny thing, because there's always Pulitzer gossip, and I'm counting on Thomas for more of it. But the year we won in 2006, we won for breaking news, but originally the Sun-Herald from the Gulf Coast was the only one that won for public service, which is the most prestigious journalism Pulitzer. But then that decision went from the journalism committee up to the all-powerful Pulitzer board, capital B, capital P, capital B. And at that point, Donald Graham, who was head of the Washington Post, said no. He picked the Times-Picayune out of the ash heap and said, it has to go to the Times-Picayune. We will award it to both papers. And this was the first time the Public Service Award had been shared. So yeah, funny things do happen on the board. I mean, the board also turned down Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf for Pulitzer.
Right. And believe it or not, that was the one who protested on that and was still around and was on the committee was John Mason Brown.
Yep.
And who actually had supported Williams in getting it for Streetcar. And they actually have it's now on YouTube. They had no, that was the Outer Critics Circle Award. But they have a Sunday afternoon program narrated by John Mason Brown where the cast does scenes from Streetcar. It's pretty amazing. But yeah, John Mason Brown fought them on that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
did it create, from what you have read, this is similar to what I was asking Beth, did it create an unreal level of expectation on Williams from Cat on?
I think there was an unreal level of expectation on him from critics and imposed by himself from Streetcar on.
Mm.
Would he or would he not have that? Because that's such a huge success and such an amazing play.
Yep.
And such a game changer for the theater that I think the pressure came from all over. I think the Pulitzers helped. I think when he got the Pulitzer for Cat, it was a reassurance that, he was still a relevant playwright. Mm-hmm. Because he was seeing William Inge was starting to have 3 or 4 plays on Broadway, and then one for Dark at the Top of the Stairs. Picnic, one of them. He won for one of them. And so, yeah, I think it made a difference. And I did notice, I was snooping around looking for things, and on the trade editions of the books and the acting editions, on the trade editions, the Pulitzer Prize will be mentioned of course, in the nice catalog copy, the back cover copy, but on the mass market paper books, it's prominently featured.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So that made a difference right there. Also with the films, Pulitzer Prize winning author, that was part of the selling point. So it must have made a difference. I was curious about, again, this how do you, it's like all awards, which is maybe an unwieldy topic, but maybe we could look at some of these. The first one that I just mentioned, that the Pulitzer Committee can either decide there's going to be no award that year, or they can step in and say, we don't like your 3 choices, okay? So the committee in 2010 came up with The Elaborate Entrance of Chad Deity by Christopher Diaz, In the Next Room or The Vibrator play by Sarah Rule, and Bengal Tiger at the Baghdad Zoo by Rajiv Joseph. And they rejected all three. And they instead chose Next to Normal, the musical. And I don't have an opinion on if their choice was right, but I was wondering how people feel about this question of an awards where they can do that, especially because the Pulitzer really does carry more weight for playwrights than just about anything, unless it's that rare, I think only O'Neill got the Nobel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for Beth and Lisa, this will be something that'll, and I speak from someone who knows from obits, this will be something that'll be in the first paragraph of your obituary.
Better than some other choices.
Exactly. It's not someone who won the Myrtle Spraggins Award for gardening. No. I don't know if there is a Myrtle Spraggins Award. If there is, I didn't mean to disparage it. But no, it's one of these things like Oscar winner, Nobel Prize winner, that just, it's there.
Right.
And
one of the other ones I found was now they have, it's odd because they have runners up. Oh, no, they don't have the short list on the website for 1986, right? So usually from 83 on, there's a 2, 3, sometimes 4 titles and then the winner. In 86, they have no award. Out of whatever the number of finalists were, the committee chose Robert Wilson's experimental work, The Civil Wars, and they just said, forget it. They weren't going to have it, was not considered a play. It's like, remember the first year they gave that Tony Award to a musical for an all-dance musical?
Contact.
Contact. It was
Yeah.
sort of like that. They just, no, we're
was a
not going to
wonderful
have
musical.
experimental theater get a Pulitzer Prize.
See, just what I said.
Proved them wrong.
Well, now, Beth, what are you working on?
I don't want to talk.
I know. Hi, Jane.
What were you working on?
I had a play, Laugh, that was done in D.C., about a year ago. That was fun. It was a slapstick comedy. I'm trying to work on something now, but I refuse to talk about my plays while I'm working on them to anybody because the characters don't like it,
Do your characters speak to you?
in a way.
How so?
I don't know. I just know that they want to tell their story their way without interference from the peanut gallery.
That would be you?
Well, that would be people. I'd be like, you think this is good? You know, I have this idea. You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of, you have to believe in your story a little.
Lisa?
Well, it's tricky because, in order, you really have to protect your headspace when you're working on something new. There are so many demons trying to tell you that your play isn't worth anything. And I also think that sometimes something like an award can be one of those voices of expectation. So I try not to talk too much. Also, I think sometimes when people ask you about what you're working on, you have this complex mess, a beautiful mess that you're working on, and you have to kind of describe it in one sentence. People just want to hear like one sentence.
Yeah, at most.
And that can be damaging because then suddenly you're trying to name the mess too early. It can reduce the complexity of what you're working on.
Especially if they're less than enthusiastic about what you have been sweating blood on.
Exactly. Yeah, and also if they're expecting it to be like your last hit. If it sounds something totally different, they might be a little.
Yeah, my
Curious.
cousin writes mysteries, and she says her characters talk to her all the time. Oh, yeah. I'm not doing that. Don't try this. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's, are there reunions for Pulitzer winners? Or do you just toil in solitude?
I wasn't a winner, so I don't know.
I guess they had something for some sort of anniversary that I was invited to, but I didn't want to go.
'Cause it's always interesting to see who shows up at these things, like a high school reunion.
Well, and there's also timing. Are there times when you feel like should certain playwrights just deserve certain recognition? I was thinking about this yesterday when we were talking about you were shortlisted with John Guare.
Right.
And in 91, the short list was John Guare for 6 Degrees of Separation, Craig Lucas for Prelude to a Kiss, and it was won by Neil Simon for Lost in Yonkers. And that may be Neil Simon's best play, but somehow it seems odd that John Guare doesn't have one.
Because 6 Degrees is such an amazing play. Yeah.
I love John Guare. He was a huge inspiration.
Definitely.
Well, it's timing. It's a lot about timing.
Right, so what's on that year?
Well, it's about the funny thing about the Pulitzer too is that it's, I mean, I've won a number of awards, and I've also been on a number of grant panels. So I've been on the other side of being in the room of having to choose. And I tell you, every grant panel I've been on, whether it's for an award for an individual artist or a grant for a theater company, I promise you there are, probably 50 people that you would be happy to give the award to. And you're allowed to give it to 1 or 5.
Take us inside the room.
Well, it's a little bit of a different process depending on, the grant. But I will tell you that, like, the number of times I've been in these rooms where, there are arguments among the panelists, there are tears because you can't believe that this person is not going to be recognized, because especially when you're an artist on the panel, you know the difference that the award can make in your life financially, to your own self-esteem, opening doors to get your work more widely produced. And the sad thing is, every time there are way more really incredibly talented people that, you could give out 10 awards instead of 1. And I'm sure the Pulitzer committee thinks of it that way too. And really the Pulitzer is just like these other grants. It's a committee of artists who meet on a certain day when they're feeling a certain way about a certain artist. And so there is, there's a little bit of a randomness to all of this. But yet the Pulitzer can carry a lot more weight. In some ways, I'm much more proud of, I received something called the Doris Duke Performing Artist Award a few years ago, which is a new award given
It's
by...
serious money, too.
Yeah, exactly. It's over the course of 5 years, it's $175,000. So it really, like, I was able to plan for 5 years how I was, that I was actually going to have time to write or use it for whatever I needed to secure my future. But what I like about the award is that it's for a body of work. And so they were looking at me as the whole artist. And then, I'm just going to say this, later on I was a panelist for that same award. Don't tell them I said that out loud. So it was really interesting for me to see the other side of it and see this process. And I will say that the amount of work that panelists put in to really learning about these artists' work so that they can really have a real discussion about who should win it, like, you put a lot of work and effort into it.
I'm on a book committee for the Ron Ridenour Award, and every year that means reading 5 impassioned books. And we get together for a conference call and talk and talk and talk. And one member of our committee just was vacillating over the phone to us for about 10 minutes between 2 books. And I was so tempted to say, "You're not Sophie being asked to choose a child at Auschwitz. We're talking about a book here." But I didn't. It was tempting. Well, sometimes you just can't. There's so much you can take. So when did you get the Doris Duke Award?
2013.
So
I'm still in the middle, yeah.
That's excellent.
Still.
Now Beth, you did your own screenplay for Crimes and Art. Was that difficult?
Writing the screenplay was really easy. It's so much easier to write a screenplay than a play.
Really?
Yes, because you don't have to worry about 3 dimensions, like physics. But I was fired originally from writing the screenplay when it was going to be done with Jonathan Demme. I was fired because I wrote it too much like the play. And then Jonathan quit on In Solidarity. And then 3 years later, Bruce Beresford was coming off of the hit Tender Mercies, and he wanted me to do it. And they said, yes. I said, well, I'm already fired because, it's too much like the play. And he said, well, I like the demi-script, but I think it needs to be a little more like the play. And I said, well, they don't want that. Oh, those people are gone. I mean, it's such a crapshoot. I will say about winning the Pulitzer Prize, the year my play was on was the first year they went to off-Broadway was considered. So I was incredibly, lucky. I mean, it's sort of so much a crapshoot.
I have to ask this because I have two talented playwrights sitting here. How in the world do you develop character through dialogue without having someone plant his or her feet on the stage and say, hi, this is who I am and why I'm here and why I feel this way? How do you do that?
I mean, I just have them start doing stuff and saying stuff.
Oh, that's
I mean, like,
specific.
I have to trick it's a really good question. And I've been doing this for a while now, so it comes a little more naturally to me, but but I do have to trick myself into it. Because a lot of times I don't really know who the characters are myself. And so I have them start talking. For me, also, the space, the way they interact with the space that they are in, helps me a lot. So, in Detroit, there are two very different couples living next door to each other.
Yes.
And you kind of see their backyards and their front yards, depending on the production. And, to reduce it, one backyard is really nice and the other one is really run down. And so you're able to see how each character's behavior changes depending on which backyard they're in. And so it's a really simple thing, but just by allowing the audience to watch that behavior, then the audience gets to draw their own conclusions. So for me, it's about behavior and space. That's where I start, anyway. But I listen to my characters a lot. A story I often tell is one of my earliest plays, which was it's called Annabella Ema, which is the name of a young girl's imaginary friend. And it's about a mother, a single mother, and her mom who are facing eviction from their trailer home. Their trailer park is being pushed aside so a highway can go through. And I tried to write the play like a regular play, like lights up, trailer park. Annabella comes running in, playing in the dust. And I just couldn't get anywhere with it. I kept starting it and stopping it and throwing scenes away, and I was just about to abandon it completely. And finally I was like, well, I have this one scene where Annabella's mom, Irene, is trying to tell her life story to a werewolf. And I was like, and I kind of like the way she tells her life story, so let me just, Lisa, put everything away and just let her speak. And I just started writing from her voice. And I realized, oh, this is kind of a first-person play. And it turned into a three-woman play, three women speaking and singing a ghost story directly to the audience. And so it's a bare stage, and they have some props in front of them, and they're kind of conjuring everything. And it's been produced it's a really great play for every awesome 99-seat black box theater in the United States. And it's three awesome parts for women. So I love it because it often gives really small theaters, a show they can do for not very much money. And it's something really new, and they're singing, and it often helps. In fact, one of the women who was in Annabella Ema at a small theater in San Francisco called Crowded Fire is now starring in The Humans on Broadway. So it's so awesome to kind of see these actresses find their own. And she plays the daughter who just lost her partner, who has the colitis disease. Cassie Beck is her name.
Thomas,
Anyway, so that's just a story of how
she doesn't look like an actress at all.
She's amazing. Yeah, she's
What
really,
does that
really
mean?
great. Yeah.
Pardon?
this just looks like an actress.
I mean, she just is so believable, and she's really plays into being run down, and you really has the authenticity to her that's flawless.
That's like the woman in Brie Larson who was in Room. She didn't wash her face for days. Yeah, IMDb. My source for everything about showbiz. Thomas, are you noting do you see trends in the way Pulitzers are awarded over the years? Like who gets recognized, who doesn't?
Well, having studied this list for just a few days, I think if you look at the long list, which I have here, some of the plays survive, some of them don't. I think that's sort of natural, you know, and it is timing. In the teens and the 20s, after, in part, Stieglitz's Armory show, they were looking for the great American novel, the great American painting, and the great American play. It was the American century, and people were starting to say, we don't have to look to Europe, we can have our own art. And I think if you look at the playwrights who win here, one play that's totally forgotten is 1920-21 is Miss Lulu Bet by Zona Gale, which I was actually at the Milwaukee Rep in 1984, and is a terrific play. But first you have No Award, then Why Marry by Jesse Lynch Williams, then No Award, then Beyond the Horizon by Eugene O'Neill, Zona Gale, Eugene O'Neill. Then you start to have Sidney Howard, George Kelly, Elmer Rice, Mark Connolly, Susan Glaspell, George Kaufman, Maxwell Anderson, and then Robert E. Sherwood wins 3 of them. Thornton Wilder wins 2 of them. We're already up to the 40s. And it doesn't start to, I think going off Broadway, I think the first one might have, I don't know, did the Shadow Box start on Broadway?
No.
Well, Chorus Line started downtown, so that's 76. And then Buried Child was at Theater for the New City. Crimes of the Heart was off Broadway, or was it in
Originally.
Louisville?
I feel like more often than not now, it's plays that were not on.
And Soldier's
Oh, yeah.
Play was downtown. I don't know where Night Mother was. But yeah, you get more and more, I think it just gets, they cast a wider net. And I think that we also know they cast a wider net because of that short list. And I really like the short list. I've gone to see plays because of the short list. I had not ever heard of Jordan Harrison or Marjorie Prime. That just was off my radar, which is not surprising. But I went to see it because it was on the short. I want to know what it's about. And then there's other plays where I actually start to pay attention now. Did anybody see An Octoroon?
I saw it.
By Brandon Jacob Jenkins.
It's supposed to be really good.
I was rooting for that to be on the short list. Not this
Oh,
time.
yeah, I was surprised.
And then things like the Flick one, it was, I don't know if this is a first here, but the short list was The Curious Case of the Watson Intelligence by Madeline George, Fun Home by Lisa Crone and Janine Tesori, and Lisa Crone and Madeline George happened to be a couple. And then it was awarded to The Flick by Annie Baker. So you had all women in the lineup there. And The Flick I like, but then did anybody see John last year?
I didn't get to see that, no.
It's her best play ever. It's so good. So The Flick gets it, and then, but again, I don't know how you go much further than this because it's so subjective. I think it's more. I wonder if the short list was a slightly longer list. You know they do that in England. They'll announce the long list.
For the Booker Prize.
Right. So and so's been long listed. Then they make it the short list. Then they announce the winner. So you get acknowledgement of more artists for their work.
Yeah.
And that seems appealing to me.
Well, the notion that the publication of the short list can increase business because people are wondering, well, who knows about this play that's produced in some black box in Soho? Let's go see it.
Absolutely. And again, I don't know about the rest of you, but I didn't start looking at this short list. I didn't know of its existence till recently. And I bet there are a lot of playwrights on here who, Dale Orlander Smith.
Yeah, she started in the spoken word poetry scene. She's great.
Rebecca Gilman, I've heard the name, I don't really know her. Rind Eckert.
Rinda Eckert.
Rinda Eckert, Isa Davis.
Isa. I know them all. I know
I've
them
heard
all.
of Christopher Shin.
It's a very small world.
Is this a coven or what?
And then Gina Gianfrido. I haven't seen any of her plays. She's been shortlisted twice. Madeline George. Did anybody see Taylor Mack's Here?
I did see that, yes.
I have my fingers crossed. Because, shall we talk about that?
Yeah, I was going to say, what are you hearing for this year?
Well, don't you think Hamilton and the
I
Humans
think-
will be on the list?
Yeah, I think Hamilton will win that.
I'm thinking Hamilton because it is
Yeah.
so innovative.
Yeah.
That's
That's probably,
But I think the Humans will be on.
the Humans will be on the list, and I'm hoping Taylor Mack
There'll be yeah.
might be a surprise.
Did,
But some of these playwrights, Stephen Karam's on there already once, but John Robin Bates has been writing terrific plays for 25 years.
timing.
There he is on the list. Christopher Durang never quite has gotten one. He was that year that in 2006, you had The Intelligent Design of Jenny Chow by Roland Jones. Do you know Roland Jones?
I've met him before, but I don't know his plays very well. He writes for a lot of TV now.
Red Light Winter by Adam Rapp. I thought that was a good play. Miss Witherspoon by Christopher Durang. And this is 2006, no award was given.
Can I interject something?
Go for it.
That's slightly tangential, but something to keep your eye out for. Because when I just said, he writes for TV now. It's a whole new world when it comes to playwrights writing for TV. Because TV has gotten so interesting in the last couple of years because now there are so many different platforms and the writing can be more adventurous. And so, when I first started my career, choosing to stop writing plays or write TV in addition to plays was kind of seen as a sellout. And now it's something that's seen as a really positive move for
Well, there's so many
playwrights.
outlets, as you said.
Because in many ways, writers control the room on a TV show. And that's not always the case in a production of a play. There's the voice of the producer, there's the voice of the director. So it's going to be interesting to see just how things shift as more and more writers start to explore that as a
It's so tough.
One case of that, which I think may have involved the being shortlisted was, or the Tony Award maybe, was Warren Light, because he had been working away for years, and then Sidemen got all this attention, and the next thing you know, he's a writer and producer for Law and Order, which I think he has been since.
No, writing for TV, I have a friend who was a script editor on Treme, and I thought it was wonderful, but he said it's so tough because you have to get one character has to get from point A to point B in a scene, and here's how the character gets there. It's as strictly marked out as a roadmap. Forget dramatic license. It's tough. It's so demanding.
Although I also hear writers talking about, a writer's room on a TV show can be, depending on who is the showrunner, the person in charge, can be a really collaborative experience in terms of brainstorming and what these episodes may be. And then now when it comes down to the wire in terms of editing your final episode, they might feel that way.
I'm curious, you see a lot of plays. What are you seeing in terms of audiences?
Oh, that's a
Demographics.
great question. And I've seen a lot of plays in a lot of cities too, which is not that so many writers are kind of based in New York and see there's difference. It's different in every city, and it can be different depending on the theater. Let me give a couple of examples. The audience development at Steppenwolf is really incredible. That theater in Chicago has been there for so long, and they developed a relationship with their audience over time. And I also feel like they've done a really great job of bringing in a younger audience to continue to be a part of their community, because there's this general feeling that it's harder and harder to get people to buy a subscription to a season for theater. And that especially maybe younger people that are newer to the theater, they don't want to put out that big chunk of cash without knowing what they're going to get, So it's interesting though. I keep hearing about the problem of aging audiences, but I don't always see it when I go to the theaters.
I remember when my wife and I saw Avenue Q 10 years ago, and there was this mob of young kids, and we thought, oh, great, it's going to be noisy. No, they were just spellbound because it was so good. Ditto Copenhagen. Copenhagen is cerebral stuff. I mean, it's three characters, Niels Bohr, his wife, and Werner Heisenberg, talking about what might have happened on a weekend. And there's a lot of physics that's involved. I thought it was fascinating. The two boys, maybe 12 years old behind us, were just spellbound. I know. I came out of that thinking, this is really cool. But I love live theater because you're sharing the air with, and when you see somebody close up doing something amazing like Vanessa Redgrave in Long Day's Journey into Night, you just think, whoa, she is taking me to some dark places. Do you worry about getting typecast as drama, comedy, musical, or?
Do you? You've written so many different kinds of plays.
I'm just curious. Oh, we had to a good friend of ours who was not from this part of the world, we had to translate The Wake of Jamie Foster. Translated from the Southern.
How'd you do that?
Well, my wife's from Tennessee, so she stepped in very well. She was going, what's he saying? Diana would tell me.
Couple more things I just want to say as I'm perusing this list. Oh, you want to go ahead?
Well, I wanted to ask you about Nilo Cruz, because didn't he win one year for a play on paper that had not been produced yet, which
That's right.
set all of us in the theater like,
Is that true? Or
I thought it would have been some small production
No.
or something.
I think it had been produced at Florida Studio Theater.
Right, it was a very small
And
theater.
I think there was a hubbub because it was a small theater.
It was a small theater, and it was unknown and all that. And that was one of the things, I was going to say two things here, well, three actually. One,
do you ever see these plays, the
Well, that was-
Kid Committee, or do they just read them?
I think mostly.
no, they see them.
Not
No?
necessarily.
Really?
No, I mean, it depends on the timing.
Yeah, I guess so.
I think there's a lot that are nominated, and also I believe you can self-nominate. So I don't think there'd be any way to
But they have a
actually-
budget, they travel.
I think they're probably allowed to, but I bet there's no way they could have ever seen them, all of them.
Or some members on the committee do
Yep.
see some and some don't, but I think they try to see as much as they can.
Is it
It's-
for a calendar year? I'm trying to remember.
It is for a calendar year,
Because, like-
and they're nominated, or they're, engaged in advance so that they're ready to go. Yeah, that would be great to have somebody answer those questions.
Yeah, I don't know that for sure.
Um,
but I'd be surprised.
Speaking of going off-Broadway, huh? What?
Does it make a difference to you guys?
It should. It should, because something can look really just that on page with really good staging. I mean, The Lion King, for starters. You have animals walking down an aisle in a theater. On paper, that looks okay. In theater, it is just astonishing. It was one of the best entrances I've ever seen. I was in tears in 5 minutes. It's that good. Can we open it up for questions?
Did you have another comment?
I did, but that's-
Oh, yeah.
Wait, do we have a mic? Wait. Do we have a mic somewhere?
I'll speak up if you
Okay,
like.
go ahead.
You mentioned that you don't want to share what you're working on with people that make sense, but at what point in the process do you want to hear your words or your character's words spoken through an actor?
Great question.
Well, she asked, when do you want to hear your new play read by actors? And I work mine really hard. I do a lot of versions for just myself. And when I'm finished it, I'll give it to a couple of friends I really trust, and then get their feedback, and then do revisions. And then, not until then, I'll get people over to my living room and do a reading in my living room. And then kind of ask them casually, how was it, And in your living room, you're safe because you're providing the liquor. So,
You're right.
but it's a while.
John, I do want to just chime in with this
Oh, yes.
quickly here, because we were talking about going off-Broadway,
Oh, sorry.
opening the field, and two things, or three, downtown artists, people that I think of as not just off-Broadway or regional, but really not commercial, who have been shortlisted include Maria Irene Ford-Ness in 1990 and What of the Night. That was really a surprise for me. She's like the queen of the Obies, and she doesn't write commercial plays. Also, Lee Brewer was nominated for the Gospel at Colonus in 1985. He's one of the founders of the Mabu Mines. You also have Eric Bogosian early in his career. And then the other thing, Estelle made me think of this, starting in pretty much the aughts or the late 90s, you get a diversity that you've never seen before in terms of race and gender and age. That it's really different in terms of Hispanic writers, Black writers, a lot of young people. And I think that Nilo Cruz was one of them. And also those people winning. You have, from 2000, you have Donald Margulies, David Auburn. In 2000, 2001, 2002, you have Susan Laurie Parks. Then 2003, Nilo Cruz. Then 2004, Doug Wright. Then 2005, John Shanley. Also, we have white guys all the way through here.
There's plenty of them, plenty to go around.
But then maybe it's 2009, you have Lynn Nottage winning. And then, how do you pronounce Alegria Huday's first name?
Chiara.
Chiara Alegria Huday's, Ayad Akhtar for Disgraced, Annie Baker for The Flick, and Stephen Adley Gurgis for Between Riverside and Crazy. And it would have been nice to have Austin Pendleton here because...
Was Austin a finalist? Or he directed that?
He directed Detroit, and he directed the one that won last year, and it would have been nice to have his viewpoint on that. Anyway.
And he's a playwright.
And he's
himself.
Yes?
I wanted to direct my, not question, but to tell you something, Ms. Henley. My mother and your mother, Liddy, were actors in Little Theater in Jackson many years ago. And my mother said you used to come to play practice and do your homework. And when you won the Pulitzer, my mother said, little did we know that little Beth would win the Pulitzer.
Who was your mother?
Mary Clay.
Mary Clay.
She was in several things with your mother. But when your mother died, I'm so sorry, but my mother called in tears and she said, our pet is gone.
I knew you were from Mississippi, but I didn't know you were from Jackson. And I went to Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi, so it's kind of unusual that we're both, it's not the norm in terms of
The Millsaps Mafia.
My question turns commercial. Okay, you got, I think we all recognize that the Pulitzer recognizes the artistic value of your work. Having worked in Hollywood for 20 years, that translates to your work being more seriously considered for the screen, which takes it into a different economic realm. So do you assume, as you write down, that your play is going to get produced because you have the Pulitzer behind your name? And do you expect a call from Hollywood?
No.
No. In fact, right now, although I will say the play I wrote after Detroit, which was called Cherokee, is a riskier and more experimental play than Detroit in some ways, and it's received 2 productions so far in D.C. and Philadelphia. And I thought, you know what? I think someone's going to take a chance on this because of the success of Detroit, and I think it did help them take a chance. And right now, I'm actually trying to trick myself into my next project, and so I'm actually trying to write something that is maybe a little stranger and a little more downtown, which I don't think is necessarily going to be right for Hollywood. However, I also have been able to get meetings with different TV networks about maybe developing my own TV show because of the success of the plays. If that happens, we'll see if I can actually pull it together and pull it off. But so I would say a little of both, but it's weird. I guess like any creative career, it's like it can be feast or famine, and it can be a real roller coaster as to whether your play is going to get produced or not. I mean, just the whole calendar of how theaters choose their season even, and if you finished your play in time for them to look at it for their next season, that's sort of the first step, So it's interesting.
I wanted to address the commercial impact the Pulitzer has. Obviously, Crimes of the Heart was done everywhere after it was done in New York. And I just read something interesting in the Dramatists Guild Quarterly in a discussion with Bruce Norris and Kira, who
does?
Yes. That In the Heights and Clybourne Park was done all over, but they felt bad for Lynn Nottage that her Pulitzer for Ruin resulted in, they said, 6 productions, only 6 nationally. Lisa, I was curious, with being a nominee, how did that affect the productions of Detroit? Because it's a wonderful play, it seems fairly easy to do. How did it go from there?
It's hard to know how much the Pulitzer affected it, but I was just talking to Lynn Nottage about that, about the fact that Ruined didn't get as many productions simply because it's a big cast, and I think it's all African Americans. Is that right? I think it's all. So it's a smaller pool to pull from. But she has another play called Intimate Apparel, which is a 2-person play, a really wonderful play that's been produced all over. That wasn't a Pulitzer Prize play, So I think sometimes it comes down to the economics of producing the play. Detroit is a 5-actor play that can be produced on one set. The cast is entirely white, and it can kind of be cast anywhere between 25 and 50 almost. So there's a big range of how you can cast it, and it's funny. So, which theaters are always looking for comedies. So in some ways, I think that has led to it getting as many productions as it has, more than the Pulitzer Prize. And what I'm amazed is it continues to get produced. I mean, I'm like, wow, there's 3 or 4 more productions. Great.
It's a good play.
Oh, well, thanks.
It's a great play.
Thanks.
I'm impressed, as you mentioned on TV, how they have these series going on now, where you'll have a play that will have 6 things. Have you all ever thought about writing a series, and how different would that be when you write a whole series, like the Homeland series or 24 series, for example?
Well, one reason that playwrights are being drawn into that world is because to create a TV series, you're creating a world that characters can live in, which is very much like creating a play. I would say, would you agree that I've never written a movie, but the language of movies is visual, and but in a TV show you can create a world and people can talk more, and so a lot of playwrights are being drawn into that world. I've dabbled around in a couple of TV ideas, and my dream would be to create a show that could be shot here in New Orleans. Another, the next show after. Well, there's many that shoot here, but Treme is the one that people most think about.
And don't they tend to work on teams of writers? There'll be like a couple leads, but then there's rooms full of people filling in, and
there's usually kind of a lead writer and then a team. They're leading.
so it's not exactly by committee, but there are a lot of voices.
Yeah.
Treme had a tag team, or about, I think, 5 writers who were just rotating.
Yeah.
Because there was such demand for a script, and then just shooting, writing, shooting, just.
Normally, there's a Bible that's created that gives you the arc of the season.
Yes.
So you know where you're going, and then the storylines are developed from that to get you to that point.
Exactly.
Did you have? I kind of jumped in. Did you have anything to say? No, Beth. On that.
No.
Okay. I can just be. I'm the oldest child, so I can just jump right in. Sorry.
I got a microphone. I probably got the loudest voice here. I'd like to know, especially more Beth or Lisa, more that your traditional straight-ahead plays, how you honed your craft. Was it studying, analysis, your favorite playwrights, just jumping in there and doing it many times yourself? If you could talk about how you became a successful playwright.
Well, one person who helped me more than anyone was Tennessee Williams. My mother, as the lady mentioned, was an actress, and I would help her with her lines. And she was very particular about each period and each word in the sentence. And I saw how beautifully a sentence could be crafted, and how if you muck up with one word, it's not as beautiful. And I don't know, Tennessee Williams' passion and his madness and his crazed sexuality, it was also enlightening. And so.
Anything in particular? Does anything in particular stand out?
Well, I remember this one play, Talk to Me Like the Rain, and Let Me Lie Here and Listen. And the woman's sitting there a lot like drinking water, and the man's talking about how he's been passed around the city like a dirty postcard and woke up in a bathtub full of gin, and very much disaster and chaos. And the woman says, I want to go away. And then he says, what? She says, I want to go away. And I related so much to wanting to go away from Mississippi. And, or just from the chaos of life, and be like her and eat tapioca pudding and, watch the surf come in. So I don't know. Many of his plays.
Did you go to a playwriting school?
No.
No.
Which was a mistake, because I didn't learn a lot about craft. I'm still struggling with that element.
Well, there's lots of ways to learn. I studied playwriting at the University of Texas at Austin. That was where I went to graduate school for playwriting. So I went to Millsaps for college. I came back to New Orleans for 2 years and did a lot of theater here. I was really lucky. A woman named Julie Hebert was running the Contemporary Arts Center when I moved back here from college, and she had a writers group that would meet like twice a month, and I was able to kind of go as a really young writer and get things read out loud and get feedback, and that was really, really important for me to happen to me. And then my schooling at the UT Austin had some really amazing teachers at the time, but also a lot of guest artists came through. So there was a teacher named Mac Wellman who had a big influence on me, who came through. I'm trying to think. Sherry Kramer, who's another really amazing playwright, came through. So I feel like in Austin I developed a lot of mentors, many of whom I'm still in touch with today.
What is it like?
And I've taught a lot since then too, in a lot of playwriting programs.
What is it like to hear actors recite words you've written?
It's so visceral. It's really
That's
just
a good
feel
way to
it in
put
your
it.
body.
Good way, in a good way or a
Yeah.
bad way?
If being electrified and terrified is a good thing, which I think it is, having your whole body wake up, it's great. I mean, it's really awesome. But as you write more plays, you really have to learn to let go of how you think that line is going to sound. It's one of the hardest things, because for a play to really soar, you've got to give it up. You've got to give it up to the actors and the directors and let the magic happen in the room. People are always asking me why in Detroit I write a lot of my stage directions as questions, like maybe he takes a glass of water, maybe he takes a sip from his water, and I do that on purpose to make room for the actors and directors to make that decision, to empower them, because then it's more fun, because I'm just one mind, So not to say that I don't cling and get controlling sometimes too, but I try to give it up, so.
In 2011, there was a issue of American Theater Magazine devoted to Tennessee Williams, and I mentioned yesterday that they interviewed, or I don't know if they interviewed you or asked four playwrights
They asked me to
to write something, and it was Tony Kushner and Stephen Adley Gerges and somebody else, and you. Do you remember what you said?
I have no memory of what I
So,
said.
because just after Beth went, do you have any just off the cuff thoughts about Williams and influence, or what, or at least
Tom,
what you like in his?
I just wrote an article for Louisiana Cultural Vistas magazine, available in the lobby, all about my relationship to Tennessee Williams, which was really great. Yeah, it was really great to write. And kind of what I was trying to get at in the article is I don't remember Tennessee Williams not being in my life. I can't remember the first moment that I read his plays. It's like he was always there for me, And so I remember something specific in college when I was at Millsaps College. I had no idea I'd talk about Millsaps so much today. But I talk about this in the article, that I had to write a paper about Blanche Dubois as a tragic hero, and kind of really tracking her through as a heroic figure with a fatal flaw. And it really blew my mind writing that paper, just thinking of her as, thinking of a hero that has flaws, kind of realizing almost for the first time that Blanche was the center of the play. Like, I think back then when I was in college, I was still assuming, like, oh, well, the men are always the center of the play, and you just read it that way. But then when you look at that play, I mean, it's Blanche.
It's totally
you know?
Blanche.
But this was, I was learning, I was young. So I think that was super important to me. And then also just like, most of the writers that I met, especially in my 20s and 30s, most of them were from the East Coast. It was very hard to find a writer from the South. And so to have Tennessee Williams, along with people like Eudora Welty and Flannery O'Connor as models for me, what it meant to live the writing life was really important. So.
Any other questions? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I still think I was tacked on, but I'm a good sport.
No, this was fascinating. Oh, yeah.
So I just want to do this.